At first, people noticed the habit before they noticed the success. Not because it was impressive, but because it didn't make sense. It was strange enough to feel unnecessary, even pointless, and definitely not something you would expect from someone who would later become a billionaire. Friends laughed at it, colleagues ignored it, and some people quietly assumed it was a waste of time. Because from the outside, it looked unproductive, almost absurd. The kind of behavior you would never find in a business book or hear recommended on a stage. And yet this habit followed him everywhere, through failed projects, through financial stress, through years where nothing seemed to work, and long before the money ever appeared. This habit was already shaping the way he thought, the way he decided, and the way he separated himself from everyone around him. What makes this story uncomfortable is that the habit itself wasn't difficult, it wasn't impressive, and it didn't require talent, discipline, or intelligence. In the way people usually imagine success requires, which is exactly why almost no one else was willing to take it seriously. Early in his career, when he was still struggling financially, he noticed a pattern that most people never stopped to question. The fact that everyone around him was constantly reacting to news, reacting to trends, reacting to opportunities that appeared suddenly and disappeared just as fast. And while everyone else seemed busy, very few people actually seemed intentional. He realized that most decisions weren't being made from clarity, but from pressure, fear of missing out, urgency created by others, and the uncomfortable truth was that even when people worked hard, they were often moving in directions they hadn't chosen consciously. So he started doing something that felt counterintuitive, even irresponsible. Every single day, without exception, he blocked off time to do absolutely nothing productive in the traditional sense. No emails, no meetings, no consumption of information, no phone, no input at all, just uninterrupted thinking. Not brainstorming, not planning aggressively, not motivating himself, but sitting with problems long enough for the noise to fade and the real questions to surface. At first, it felt like a waste, especially when money was tight and time felt precious. But he noticed something subtle happening. Decisions that once felt overwhelming began to feel obvious, not because the problems disappeared, but because he was finally thinking instead of reacting. While others jumped from idea to idea, he began rejecting opportunities more confidently, not because they were bad, but because they didn't align with a direction he had finally taken the time to define. This habit didn't make him smarter overnight, but it made him calmer, and calm is an underrated advantage in a world addicted to urgency. Over time, this daily practice changed how he processed information. Instead of consuming more, he filtered better. Instead of responding immediately, he waited. And in that waiting, patterns emerged that were invisible to people constantly in motion. He began to notice how markets moved in cycles, how hype peaked before value appeared, how the best opportunities rarely looked exciting at first, and how the loudest moments were often the least important. Most people assume success comes from doing more, but his experience suggested the opposite. That clarity comes from subtraction, from creating space where thought can actually occur. Years later, when his business began scaling, and money was no longer the immediate problem, the habit didn't disappear, it became even more important, because as his influence grew, so did the number of distractions trying to claim his attention. Offers, partnerships, media requests, opportunities that looked impressive on the surface, but added complexity instead of leverage, and without that daily pause, it would have been easy to confuse activity with progress. This habit became his anchor, the one moment in the day where decisions weren't influenced by urgency, ego, or external pressure, but by long-term consequences most people never slow down enough to consider. What made this habit weird wasn't that it involved thinking, but that it involved intentional silence in a world that rewards speed, visibility, and constant output. Choosing to stop felt almost rebellious. And yet, this silence was where his biggest decisions were made. Not impulsively, not emotionally, but deliberately, after sitting with the discomfort long enough for clarity to replace anxiety. People who later studied his success tried to attribute it to intelligence, timing, or luck. But those explanations miss the point, because many people are intelligent, many people experience good timing, and luck is widely distributed. What isn't common is the willingness to slow down consistently, even when it feels inefficient, even when no one is watching, even when there's no immediate reward. This habit didn't guarantee success, but it created the conditions where good decisions could compound without being interrupted by noise. And over years, those decisions shaped a trajectory that looked extraordinary from the outside. By the time he reached billionaire status, the habit was no longer strange to him, it was non-negotiable, because he understood something most people never learn, that the quality of your decisions matters far more than the quantity of your actions. The irony is that if you watched him practice this habit early on, you would never predict the outcome. You wouldn't see ambition, hustle, or urgency. You would see stillness, patience, and restraint, qualities rarely associated with extreme success. This story isn't suggesting that thinking alone makes you rich, or that action doesn't matter. But it does challenge the assumption that constant movement equals progress, because sometimes the most powerful move is to stop long enough to see what others are too busy to notice. So the question this story leaves you with isn't whether you can adopt this habit, but whether you are willing to tolerate the discomfort of slowing down in a world that rewards speed, and whether the decisions you're making today are truly yours, or simply reactions to the noise around you. If you want more true stories about the unconventional habits and hidden rules that shape extreme wealth, the things that sound strange until they work, make sure you subscribe, because the next story reveals how a billionaire built his fortune by ignoring advice almost everyone else blindly followed.